All right, welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah, always exciting to see what we're going to uncover today.
So for this one, we've got a pretty intriguing collection of material all centered around Eckhart Tolle's ideas, specifically Beyond the Power of Now, which critiques and expands on his work.
Looks like we're going beyond just the power of now this time, huh?
Yeah, we're diving deeper, so to speak. We've got critiques, alternative spiritual concepts. Seems like our listener wants the full picture, not just Tolle's take.
A panoramic view.
Exactly. So our mission, if we choose to accept it, is to extract the essence of these different perspectives, see where they clash, where they harmonize, and, what it all means for us, for anyone trying to make sense of this stuff.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, so the book kicks off with this idea of our separation from the now.
Ah, classic Tolle.
Yeah, he's all about it. The core insight is that the past and future, they're mental constructs that rob us of the present moment.
Right, always dwelling on what was or worrying about what might be. And that's the source of our unhappiness, according to Tolle.
And the source digs into this, saying it's not just a surface level thing. It's about different layers of awareness. We've got this everyday level and then something way deeper within.
Deeper levels of consciousness and unconsciousness.
Right. And the source even mentions this thing called the dark night of the soul.
Yeah, I've heard of that. It's a tough period in spiritual life.
Yeah, like a spiritual detox or something, right?
Yeah.
A lot of inner turmoil and questioning. Sounds intense.
It can be. It's like all your deeply held beliefs and patterns get shaken up. It can be unsettling, but ultimately, transformative.
And then the source brings in this Christian mystical framework, this three-stage journey: purification, illumination, and then divine union. Almost like a map for navigating these levels of consciousness.
Yeah, like a spiritual progression.
Yeah.
Clearing away the old stuff, gaining insight, and finally experiencing a profound connection with something bigger than yourself.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics, where the source starts to push back against Tolle.
Okay, let's do it.
First up, the big one, the power of now itself. Tolle is all about anchoring ourselves in the present moment, right?
Right, absolutely. That now is all there truly is, and by being present, we can transcend suffering. That's his central message.
But, and here's the critique, the source argues that Tolle's view lacks what they call verticality, depth. They compare it to other traditions like Kashmir Shaivism, Dzogchen, Deism, even Christian Hermeticism. These are, ancient systems that explore consciousness, but with a more multidimensional understanding.
A more three-dimensional or Trinitarian understanding, as the source puts it. They introduce this idea of a transcendental presence, which is the timeless now, and a dynamic spiritual power, which is, like the energy of the now, the power of now.
Mm.
And connecting to this presence, they say, it enlightens us with this radiant energy.
And they connect that to Holy Communion and the Holy Spirit in Christian mysticism.
Yeah, so it's not just about being still, it's about receiving this transforming energy.
Okay, next up, the role of the mind. Tolle talks about becoming aware of our thoughts, watching the thinker, and shifting our attention to the now.
Yeah, he draws on Buddhist Vipassana meditation. That moment-to-moment awareness of your thoughts and sensations. Realizing thoughts are just events, not who you are.
But the source here, they kind of push back against this idea of, fighting the mind.
Attacking the mind.
Exactly. They highlight the interplay between the conscious and subconscious mind. The subconscious, it's like this program, right, shaped by our experiences and perceptions. And if we look at it from a bigger picture...
The author argues that a state of no mind, isn't necessarily the secret to creativity.
Right. They even mention examples of Zen Buddhists encountering problems that meditation alone couldn't solve. And they cite that Hadamard survey of scientists where most of them said creative breakthroughs came when the subconscious was at work, not when the mind was completely blank.
Yeah, so it's less about shutting down the mind and more about understanding how it works, especially the subconscious.
Okay, now let's talk about emotions. The source describes thinking as a more male, mental way of processing and feeling as a female, affective way. Emotions, they say, are energetic reactions that carry information about our subconscious values.
It's like they're reflecting our value judgments, how we're reacting to things.
And Tolle talks about this vicious circle where thoughts and emotions fuel each other, right?
Yeah, you dwell on something negative, makes you feel worse, and that feeling reinforces the negative thinking.
But the source argues that a big reason for this cycle is that we often fail to, they say, husband our emotions, meaning we don't guide them with rational, life-affirming principles.
So it's about bringing the mind and emotions into harmony.
Now, what about positive emotions, like love and joy? The source introduces this hierarchy of spiritual bliss from Christian mysticism. Beatitude, bliss, joy, then pleasure. Beatitude being the ultimate, the experience of pure being.
Yeah, and they define spiritual love as this blessing energy that comes from being itself, which they equate to the Holy Spirit.
So selfless love, it's not something we manufacture, it's a channel for this divine force.
That's a powerful concept.
Now let's touch on spiritual traditions briefly. The source explains the Buddhist Trikaya, which refers to the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. And in Dzogchen, the aim is to realize these three as a unified whole.
Yeah, the three bodies of the Buddha. It's about different dimensions of being, from the formless essence to the manifested reality.
And the source connects this to the idea that our feeling of separation from the Dharmakaya and Sambhogakaya, that's the root of our pain.
And unifying them, that's the path to overcoming suffering. And they draw a parallel to the Holy Spirit.
Right. They suggest the Holy Spirit fills us with this radiant light energy, which heals that sense of separation and lets us experience our true spiritual identity.
A beautiful concept.
Now, onto the pain body. Tolle describes it as this accumulation of past emotional pain we carry.
Right, that heavy weight we drag around.
Yeah. But the source argues that people often experience this pain body as something alien, not really a part of their true self.
Almost like an intruder.
Yeah, and they say that while mindfulness can temporarily dissolve it, lasting dissolution often requires a kind of initiation by the Holy Spirit. And this is where it gets interesting.
They propose that maybe it's not ego identification with the pain body that's the problem, but rather a lack of a healthy ego, a lack of self-worth, ego deficiency, they call it.
So it's kind of flipping the script. Maybe a strong sense of self is actually necessary for spiritual growth.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
All right, let's talk fear and separation. The source agrees with Tolle that fear is a natural consequence of perceiving ourselves as separate beings in a constantly changing world.
That vulnerability is a major source of fear.
And transcending that self-other duality, that's essential to overcoming it. They mention yoga as the union of the individual self with the universal spirit.
Yoga, it's all about bridging that gap.
But then they contrast Tolle's perspective, arguing that love and reverence for life don't just come from an empty mind, but from a developed philosophy that values existence.
Right, like humanists and philanthropists. They have a system of beliefs that guides their actions.
Okay, so on negativity, suffering, and time. The source acknowledges the future can be better, but it won't be nirvana, which is beyond time, in the now.
That's the Buddhist concept of nirvana, yeah.
And they bring in the Buddhist idea of samsara, this endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Even improved future states are temporary within that cycle.
It's the cycle of becoming.
And they emphasize that being is more than just an idea. It requires spiritual realization, empowered by Shakti.
It's not just intellectual, it's experiential.
Now, on the topic of problems, they argue that what we call a problem is often mind-dependent. Reality itself isn't inherently problematic.
It's how we interpret it.
Right. They give examples like border security or real estate bust. One person's problem is another's opportunity.
Different perspectives.
When it comes to action and enlightenment, the source says that being rooted in being allows us to pursue goals without being attached to outcomes.
Detachment from results. That's a key theme in many spiritual traditions.
Yeah, they distinguish between the unchanging context of being and the ever-changing content of becoming.
So, acting without clinging to specific outcomes.
And on the illusion of time, the source emphasizes that true spirituality is about experiencing a reality beyond time. They describe the mystic as someone who lives in the time-bound world, but is grounded in the timeless now.
Time is seen as an illusion that veils the ultimate reality.
Now, on civilization and the now, Tolle sees this collective resistance to the now as the basis for our dehumanized industrial civilization.
A kind of collective dysfunction.
The source mentions that this has neo-Marxist undertones, but they argue against this idea of a collective problem.
They say it's more of an individual issue.
Right. Many great spiritual masters walked their path alone, and they even talk about this historical shift in European culture from the tribe to the individual.
So the focus shifted from the collective to the individual, with capitalism and private property emphasizing individual freedom.
Now, on negative emotions and presence, the source explains that accessing the power of now, which they link to the Holy Spirit baptism, can reframe our experiences, giving us more choice in how we deal with negative emotions.
It's about letting divine power dissolve those emotions within a context of connection to being.
But they caution against just accepting things as okay if it's based on what they call cognitive delusion.
Blind acceptance isn't the answer.
They also make a distinction between improving our external life situation and achieving true spiritual happiness and fulfillment.
Yeah, real fulfillment requires that spirit-blessed relationship with the divine.
And on the purpose of life's journey, they describe it as a twofold process, a journey into being and a journey into becoming.
Inward and outward.
The journey into being leads to peace, they say, and becoming divorced from being leads to suffering. And when we're grounded in the now, beingness encompasses becoming.
It's an integration of the present and the future.
Now, on the past and present, they use this image of light dispelling darkness.
They say that radiant presence just dissolves the unconscious past.
They also introduce Shaktipat, that descent of the power of now severing the heart center not for self-awakening, and Sit Shakti, the radiant energy of awakened consciousness.
Powerful concepts.
They also talk about the value of understanding our past conditioning and present patterns, even through things like astrological readings.
They recommend getting readings from multiple astrologers.
But they're clear that while understanding our conditioned self is good, it's the spiritual light that truly enlightens.
It's that direct experience.
Now, on being merely present versus divinely present, they say divine presence isn't just about penetrating the turn, but allowing ourselves to be penetrated by its power, by the spirit energy.
It's a two-way street.
They use these contrasting examples. A baseball infielder totally focused on the game and experiments with silent prayer.
So, willful attentiveness versus passive receptivity to grace.
Rinzai Zen versus mystical Christianity. And they even critique Rinzai Zen's lack of emphasis on grace.
Interesting comparison.
They also offer a different interpretation of the parable of the 10 virgins.
Different perspectives on the same story.
And get this, the author talks about their experience learning logical thinking from Ayn Rand's philosophy.
Wow, that's an interesting blend.
Now, on the inner body and the bliss body, they identify Tolle's invisible inner body as the pranamaya kosha in Hindu yoga.
The sheath of life force energy.
But they say the dimension for experiencing the absolute is not the pranamaya kosha, but the anandamaya kosha,
The bliss sheath.
which they equate with Shakti, Ananda, Sambhogakaya, the Holy Spirit, and trying to objectify this blessing power, they say, prevents non-dual realization.
It's not a separate thing.
Focusing on the life energy body can help control prana, awaken kundalini, but it's the reunion of the Sambhogakaya with the Dharmakaya and the Sacred Heart that leads to the realization of being.
It's about that ultimate union.
They say connecting with both involves whole-bodied awareness, connecting to inner and outer space.
Inner and outer.
They advise practicing connection with the inner body for grounding and presence, but knowing that the goal is to awaken to that divine spirit current.
A path to the Sacred Heart.
Now, on forgiveness and presence, they say that confronting the inner body can bring up negative emotions and physical unease.
It's about cutting through those deep-seated resistances.
They compare it to using a diamond blade knife versus a butter knife.
The consciousness of an advanced meditator versus a beginner.
On physical health, they acknowledge that the benefits of inner body contemplation are debatable, but they stress the proven benefits of exercise and a natural diet.
Jack LaLanne is their example.
They point out there's no evidence for Tolle's claim that inhabiting the inner body slows aging.
Science does back that up.
They do mention Tolle's self-healing meditation for the immune system and Mantak Chia's teachings on circulating chi.
Different approaches to energy work.
On relationships, they critique Tolle for focusing only on the mind, emphasizing the interaction of energy fields, auras.
It's not just about thoughts, it's about energy.
Regarding death, they bring in the Eastern view of death as an opportunity for immortality.
Like in the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
They talk about merging with the clear source light to avoid rebirth.
And the challenge of staying focused on that light.
They agree with Tolle that death is a chance for realization, but often missed.
Due to a lack of understanding and preparation.
They recommend Kubler-Ross and Levine, and they stress that salvation is in the not future becoming or external things.
It's about being utterly present, letting the Holy Spirit divinize that presence.
On enlightened relationships, they flat out call Tolle's idea of complete acceptance New Age nonsense.
Strong words.
They say the key is right understanding, knowing yourself, the other, the dynamics, maybe with astrology and right action, and true communion, they say, requires Shaktipat.
Understanding, action, and grace.
They point out Tolle's pessimistic view of male-female relationships as a crisis.
He sees it as a symptom of a deeper problem.
They bring up the Mars-Venus analogy, summarizing the differences.
Head versus heart, rational versus emotional.
They even mention that some researchers say only men can be true geniuses. And the author notes encountering few profound female spiritual teachers, citing Ayn Rand as an exception, who was an atheist.
Quite a statement.
On homosexuality, they point out that spiritual traditions offer little guidance.
It's a topic that's often overlooked.
They contrast New Age acceptance with traditional religious views, and they present the argument that, from a biological reproductive perspective, it's abnormal, but still equal rights.
A delicate topic.
On spiritual acceptance, they define it as at one-ment with being, allowing mind and body to function freely, not just mind-based toleration.
It's deeper than just tolerance.
They use Jesus in the temple as an example, not passively accepting everything.
Acceptance doesn't mean inaction.
They compare Sagittarius and Virgo to show how astrological signs influence our view of life. All signs needed for the whole. Even negative tendencies don't block self-nature once established in being.
Astrology providing insights.
Negative emotions, they say, have one message: how you feel, a conditioned response. Understanding the cause means examining subconscious judgments.
Looking deeper into the why.
They debunk Tolle's claim about the observer effect changing physical phenomena, using gambling as a counterexample.
Observation alone doesn't change reality.
On the New Earth, they present Tolle's vision, but the author calls it a puerile fantasy.
I'm not buying it.
They critique the idea of animals living in peace.
Nature isn't always harmonious.
They disagree with Tolle that the giver-receiver dynamic vanishes in shared being.
Roles remain even in unity.
On social problems, they present Tolle's view of evil as unconsciousness.
Inner transformation as the solution.
But they argue that capitalism, not consciousness, solves hunger and violence.
The different take on societal problems.
They mention Tolle's advocacy of passive resistance, but say sometimes resistance is necessary, intelligent action required.
Choosing the right course of action.
They explain surrendered action, but are skeptical about its impact on work.
Not everything can be revolutionized by surrender.
Even plants, they say, show resistance.
Nature itself resists.
They clarify that being present doesn't mean surrendering to what is. Presence allows choice.
Being present gives you the power to choose.
They use secular humanists as examples of how rational mind can be Earth's salvation.
The power of the mind.
Contrasting Tolle's view, they see the mind as God-given, misused, not inherently bad.
It's a tool that can be used for good or bad.
On dealing with disaster, they present Tolle's view of surrender as the key.
Letting go in the face of hardship.
But they contrast this with the Indian yoga equation, Sat equals Siddhananda.
Being is consciousness bliss.
Emphasizing both surrender and conscious connection to Shakti for transformation.
Surrender and connection.
On God realization, they present Tolle's claim that it's the most natural thing, God being itself.
God is our true nature.
But they argue it requires dedicated practice, sadhana, citing the Buddha's efforts.
Spiritual growth requires effort.
Finally, they recommend a whole bunch of books for further reading.
A reading list for deeper exploration.
So there you have it. We've gone through a lot, haven't we?
We certainly have.
This deep dive into Beyond the Power of Now, it really highlights the complexities of this whole idea of the now.
It's not as simple as it seems.
The source offers a more active, energy-infused kind of presence.
Not just stillness, but dynamic connection.
And their views on the mind, the ego, emotions, even the path to liberation itself, it's all quite different from Tolle.
Like different perspectives, different paths.
It's a reminder to engage critically with spiritual ideas, you know.
To think for yourself, to question.
To consider all the angles. So I'm curious, for you listening, what resonates with you? What parts of this conversation made you think, that's interesting?
Yeah. What sparked something in you?
And how might these different perspectives on consciousness, how might they influence your daily life, your own spiritual journey?
Food for thought.
Definitely check out those recommended books if you want to dig deeper.
Always more to learn.
A huge thanks to our listener for sending in this material.
Great stuff.
And to you for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.
See you then.